Welcome to the Effective Instruction in Mathematics Across Tiers, Tier 3 module. This is the last of 3 modules and should take 22 minutes to view. The Effective Instruction in Mathematics Across Tiers, Tier 3 module, there will be 3 main objectives. First, we will discuss how MTSS applies to mathematics at the Tier 3 level and consider what effective instruction and intervention looks like, as well as ways to enhance and support academic engagement. Additionally, we will discuss differences between Tiers 2 and 3. Next, we will discuss matching intervention to need, and finally, we will discuss how to locate high-quality interventions. The overall viewing time is 22 minutes for this module. We have already discussed in the past modules the components of effective core instruction for all students and Tier 2. During this module, we will continue the conversation of a multi-tiered system of supports for mathematics by discussing the components of Tier 3. The instructional focus of Tier 3 balances core instruction with filling the concept and skill gaps specific to individual students. Instruction is provided in either smaller groups or an individual basis. Additional time is provided and is a non-negotiable, meaning that if time is not increased, then Tier 3 supports are not occurring. Progress monitoring occurs weekly, for example. Let's begin with the purpose and characteristics of Tier 3. The larger the gap, educators are less likely to assume an instructional issue. The focus tends to be on the individual student, and problem solving occurs around what barriers may be due to a student learning deficit. It's about pedagogy. The ability to teach and reach the student where they are and get them to where they need to be. It requires tremendous flexibility, which is the ability to tailor to the individual needs and learning styles of the student. The purpose of Tier 3 supports is to help students overcome significant barriers to learning academic and/or behavioral skills required for school success. The function is to reduce and eliminate barriers. If time is not increased, it is not Tier 3. We need a cycle where there is greater than one-to-one response and to change the predisposition for wrong answers. The expected outcome of Tier 3 supports combined with Tiers 1 and 2 is that the students will achieve Tier 1 proficiency levels established by the district. Tier 3 is what few students receive and is the most intense service level a school can provide to a student. It is provided to very small groups and/or individual students. All problem solving considers academic and behavior engagement together in the context of universal design. Tier 3 supports require effective levels of collaboration and coordination among the staff, both general and specialized, providing services to the student. Provided to students who demonstrate both intense needs, the large gap in expected versus current performance, such as years of foundational skill development, and severe learning problems, such as the unresponsiveness to intervention. The National Center on Intensive Intervention's mission is to build district and school capacity to support implementation of data-based individualization for students with severe and persistent learning needs. They have developed multiple resources around data-based individualization, or DBI. DBI is a research-based process for individualizing and intensifying interventions through the systematic use of assessment data, validated interventions, and research-based adaptation strategies. One resource is a framework for intensive intervention, which is available on the NCII website or by going to the resource section of this module. Two main points of this document are that intensive intervention is meant for students that have not responded to prior tiers of support and that have historically had very low academic achievement and are not progressing adequately towards core expectations. Instruction and intervention is developed using a 4-step database problem-solving process applied to individual students, compared to problem-solving instruction for skills in Tier 2. Data collected to inform Tier 3 instruction typically is individual student diagnostic data, whether it's academic and/or behavior. The image on the right is the data-based individualization graphic located on the front page of the Intensive Intervention website. You can click on the components in the interactive graphic to learn more about the steps in the DBI process and find relevant resources. A second resource that the National Center on Intensive Intervention has developed is this document entitled Implementing Intensive Intervention, Lessons Learned from the Field. This is also available on the NCII website as well as the resource section of this module. Two main points from this document are that the most experienced specialized experts who have strong technical skills should be working with students with intense needs. The individual that has the strongest content knowledge should either have direct contact with the student or be the driving force of the intervention. Quite often, the knee-jerk reaction is to put anyone with a student that can provide the intervention. But if this person does not have content knowledge or is not being instructed or directed by someone with strong content knowledge, then the student does not have access for clarification and demonstration or modeling of the concepts being learned. Also, that experts in analyzing multiple forms of data and using those data to make accurate instructional decisions should be part of the team. Ensuring that we are collecting purposeful data and have experts that can analyze and interpret the data is crucial. Only then will we be able to make accurate instructional decisions. Too often we see data admiration occurring, where a lot of data is being collected, but it is either data that is not useful for our purpose or is being interpreted incorrectly and therefore not yielding effective instructional decisions. It is important to differentiate between Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. Tiers of instruction can be differentiated on several dimensions: the intensity of the instruction, the focus of the instruction, the frequency of the delivery of the tiered instruction, a combination of both the intensity and quantity of supplemental instruction, and the level of progress monitoring used at each tier. Tier 3 does not necessarily mean individual student. The intensity of the intervention is driven by the intensity and severity of the needs. If there is more than one student with similar needs of a similar intensity, the intervention can be provided to all. Students should be grouped for instruction whenever possible and whenever appropriate, regardless of the instructional tier, so long as they are grouped with similar needs at a similar intensity. Simply stated, everything that applied to Tier 2 also applies to Tier 3. Tier 3 is more complex in delivery, however, and potentially requires additional resources. The main addition involved in the complexity of Tier 3 is additional time. If time has not been increased, Tier 3 is not occurring. For additional information regarding the differentiation of tiered support, there is available information at the RTI network. Interventions at Tier 2 involve instructional programs that are aimed at a level of skill development considered to be further along the continuum of skill acquisition than that seen at Tier 3. For example, instruction based on foundational skills. A 4th grade student who is receiving Tier 2 supports for math may already have some skills in the computation of fractions, but has underlying deficits with fraction equivalence. By contrast, a similar 4th grade student identified as being at risk and placed into Tier 3 may lack the more foundational skills of number sense. Clearly, these two tiers are being differentiated based on the nature of the instructional program, which is directly matched to the student's level of identified risk. In some models of MTSS, the same intervention may be used for students at Tiers 2 and 3, but the difference is the amount of time that the student spends within the tiered instruction. For example, 30 minutes a day versus 45 minutes a day, or 3 times a week versus 5 times a week. In one model, students receiving Tier 2 supports may spend 30 minutes per day, 3 days per week, with a particular intervention focused on developing skills regarding the computation of fractions, while those students at Tier 3 spend 30 minutes per day, 5 days a week in the same intervention. Or, alternately, if foundational skills are identified as a deficit, an additional 15 minutes per day may be devoted to number sense. Given that progress monitoring is being used to assess the student's response to instruction, students at Tier 2 typically receive progress monitoring less frequently than those at Tier 3. In some models, the frequency of progress monitoring is defined as every other week for Tier 2 at the group level and weekly for Tier 3, either at the group or individual level. Again, MTSS has the flexibility of allowing the school to establish a level of progress monitoring that is both feasible, given the instructional demands of the classroom, and meaningful in obtaining knowledge of a student's response to instruction. The Center on Response to Intervention publishes charts to assist educators and families in becoming informed consumers who can select screening tools that best meet their individual needs. Tier 3 supports the provision of intense intervention, which addresses severe and intense needs of students in mathematics. Tier 3 supports are provided to students who demonstrate both intense needs, or large gaps in expected versus current performance, and severe learning problems, or the unresponsiveness to intervention. For example, when algebra students struggle, it is often with concepts surrounding computation of fractions. However, if a student has intense and severe gaps, foundational skills may be missing all the way back to number sense. The delivery of Tier 3 instruction is focused on the skills that pose the greatest barrier to acceleration of student learning, characterized by the greatest number of minutes. Again, if time has not increased, it is not Tier 3. The smallest group size, smaller group than Tier 2, or an individual one-to-one situation, and the narrowest focus of that instruction. Often there are foundational skills that are missing, meaning years of gaps are present. Main components of effective instruction in math at the Tier 3 level are: instruction should be more explicit and systematic, with a focus on foundational skills that may be missing. Instruction should provide models of proficient problem solving, verbalization of thought processes, guided practice, corrective feedback, and frequent cumulative review. Intervention should include instruction on solving word problems that is based on common underlying structures. Use of error analysis data to identify instructional deficits and necessary adaptations. Without utilizing error analysis to determine deficits, foundational skills may be overlooked. An increase of math fluency through opportunity for practice and utilization of strategies, such as cover, copy, and compare, or technology that provides drill and practice. Solving word problems using structured organizers, such as verbal-visual word association, seen in the bottom right corner, or semantic feature analysis grids. Reciprocal peer tutoring, where students are assembled in groups of 2 or more and are trained to work together on a specific academic task. The students work together to prompt, monitor, and evaluate each other while working toward group goals. RPT is valuable across content and at any grade level. Math centers with core instructional goals, such as station rotations, which may have hands-on manipulatives, National Library for Virtual Manipulatives, solve and switch approach, or problem-solving puzzlers. As discussed during the Tier 2 module, the design of any intervention requires a comprehensive understanding of the learning barrier. For example, if the student's understanding of key mathematical vocabulary is a barrier, then explicit pre-teaching of vocabulary should be included with the instructional design. Again, this document is located in the Resources section of the module. It is a tool to assist the identification of common mathematics barriers, as well as the observable student characteristics, effective approaches, strategies, and supports to address the barriers, as well as examples for delivery of instruction across the continuum of support. The problem-solving process continues to be vital in the determinations for instruction and intervention supports provided for the individual student. The heart of effective intervention resides in accurate problem identification and problem analysis. When we are determining how we are going to maximize our efforts to match intervention to student need, we must first understand the student need explicitly. When students are not successful or evidence intense and severe needs, more in-depth problem analysis is required to intensify interventions. As we discussed in the first and second modules, in order to understand the student need, we must utilize assessment tools that will provide us with valuable and valid information regarding the student's response to the intervention that we are providing. Progress monitoring tools, specifically mastery measures, provide the information necessary to determine response to intervention efforts quickly. A math example of a mastery measure for a Tier 3 intervention would be a CBM that focuses specifically on one skill, such as multiplying single-digit numbers. An error analysis of the CBM will provide valuable information on specifically where the student is struggling and allow us to develop a hypothesis around why the student or students are not progressing as expected. Tier 3 will require more intensive team-based support, as more content and pedagogical expertise is necessary to address the need of the student. The problem-solving process continues to be vital in the determinations for instruction and intervention supports provided for the individual student or students. Problem identification and the problem analysis will be crucial to the development of a hypothesis prior to implementing in the intervention plan. The same questions should be considered by the team. However, in Tier 3, the supports will be provided to an individual student or small group of students with like skill deficits. Matching intervention to need should focus on engaging in problem ID and problem analysis and how you use that information to design a strong Tier 3 intervention. After a CBM progress monitoring probe is scored, the teacher or student plots the score on an individual CBM graph. An examination of the data plotted on the CBM graph will allow the teacher to determine whether a student is making adequate progress. It is recommended that for students receiving Tier 3 support, scores should continue to be plotted on his or her existing progress monitoring graph. The teacher should draw a dotted vertical line to indicate when a new intervention begins. This will allow the problem-solving team to compare the progress made during the different levels of intervention. This is an example of a Tier 3 situation, providing opportunities to make, show, and write number concepts utilizing the CRA approach. Regular, consistent intervention should be in place, in addition to and aligned with core instruction. For example, the individual student or few students that have the same targeted skill need are receiving Tier 3 supports for fractions as well as number sense. 4 to 5 days per week of targeted support with aligned materials for 30 to 45 minutes per day. Progress monitoring is occurring weekly through AIM checks in an effort to ensure generalization to core concepts. The same questions for consideration are utilized when designing intervention for Tier 3. What instruction or intervention will be provided during that time? How much time is needed each day to accelerate skill development? Who will provide the instruction or intervention, and where will the instruction occur? We have discussed where to find high-quality intervention programs during the past modules, but here are a few additional considerations. When selecting math instructional materials, educators want mathematics instructional materials that work. But whether it's for textbooks, software, or other branded products, the vast research on these materials can overwhelm any decision maker. So when it comes time for your school district to replace math instructional materials, where do you start? The WhatWorks Clearinghouse can help. In this video, you can find how the WhatWorks Clearinghouse can serve as a resource when selecting math instructional materials. The video is available for viewing on the WhatWorks Clearinghouse website. The IRIS Center is a national center dedicated to improving education outcomes for all students. They offer a wide variety of resources on evidence-based practices and programs, including instructional modules and research summaries from federally sponsored sites, among much else. There is a huge variety of professional development options regarding all of the resources highlighted here. As we have discussed, aligning tiers of instruction is vital. Tier 3 supports are provided to allow students to meet Tier 1 expectations. The same points here are the ones that we spoke of during Tier 2 module. The infrastructure necessary to align all tiers of support must have those components incorporated. As previously discussed during the Tier 2 module, the example shown here is Envision Math by Pearson, which is a publisher that is on the adoption list for Florida and used by numerous districts in Florida. This is an example only and the supplemental materials that go along with and are aligned to core may also be used for Tier 3 supports. The National Center on Intensive Intervention has developed guidance for planning standards-aligned instruction within a multi-tiered system of supports. Here's an example for counting and number sense. They provide examples of how to apply standards-relevant instruction across core instruction, secondary intervention, intensive intervention, and to support students with significant cognitive challenges that require alternate achievement standards. There are additional math examples on the NCII website. Effective core instruction results from intentionally matching strategies and supports to student needs. Doing mismatched strategies and supports more intensely or more often will not result in better outcomes. Intentionally matched strategies and supports should be used to intensify instruction. Richard Elmore said, "Teaching is not rocket science. It is, in fact, far more complex and demanding work than rocket science." This quote could never be more true, especially when providing intensive intervention to students. A final thought. Success is rarely a straight line, but something that requires a lot of thinking and circling back. Successful intensive intervention is a journey. Take small steps and stay on track.